Have you ever wondered how one of the world's most wanted men, a notorious cartel kingpin, could be taken down, and why it seems to have happened so suddenly? I'm talking about Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, the head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, a man whose operations span continents, whose reach is untouchable. Yet, for the first time, we're hearing something shocking.
The Mexican army has killed powerful cartel boss El Mencho. He was one of the most wanted men in both Mexico and the United States. The US Embassy there said it provided intelligence to Mexican special forces for the operation. El Mencho's killing set off a wave of violence, with cartel members torching cars and gunmen blocking highways in more than half a dozen states in Mexico.
Authorities in Mexico say at least 62 people have been killed following a wave of violence that broke out after the killing of the country's most wanted man. El Mencho, the leader of the new Jalisco New Generation Cartel, died after being captured by Mexican special forces on Sunday.
Could the US have played a pivotal role in his downfall? And if so, what does it mean for the future of the war on drugs and international diplomacy? Hold that thought, because the truth is even more complex than you might think. Now, El Mencho has been a nightmare for law enforcement for years. His cartel is a major player in the global drug trade, responsible for an astonishing amount of methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl flooding the streets, not just in the US, but worldwide. And despite his elusiveness, he's managed to outsmart Mexican authorities time and time again. But something happened recently that has left many scratching their heads. In a twist that no one saw coming, a piece of the puzzle has finally fallen into place. You see, the US government has been hunting him for years. He's been one of their top targets. The US has been offering millions in rewards, deploying intelligence networks, and exerting relentless pressure on Mexican authorities to find him. But here's the kicker. The revelation of their role in his capture is far more nuanced than you might expect. So, let's break this down. The United States has had boots on the ground in Mexico for decades. We're not talking just about agents working at the border, but sophisticated intelligence sharing. Think about satellites, wiretaps, and undercover agents planted deep in criminal networks. The US has invested vast resources in tracking El Mencho's every move, and it looks like, after years of failed attempts, this surveillance network may have finally cracked the case. But this wasn't a straight shot to victory. You've got to wonder, why now? Why did El Mencho, who's evaded capture for so long, suddenly slip up? Could it be that the intel from US agencies gave the Mexican government the leverage they needed to get close? Here's where the story gets interesting. The cooperation between US intelligence agencies like the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, and FBI with their Mexican counterparts has been critical. But here's the problem. It's a double-edged sword. Now you have to ask yourself, at what point does the US involvement become too much? Remember, both countries are partners in the fight against drug cartels, but this partnership comes at a cost. On one side, Mexico wants to assert its power to handle these criminals alone, while the US feels it has a vested interest. In the end, this issue won't just affect El Mencho's downfall, but the entire landscape of US-Mexico relations going forward. And the impact of this, well, it's not just a political game anymore. It has real-world consequences. You've got US authorities pushing for more power, more involvement, and in some cases, even military action. So, while this might be seen as a win in the drug war, it's also raising some serious questions about how far the US should go. Now, what does all of this mean for El Mencho's legacy and the future of CJNG? Well, this isn't just another high-profile cartel leader being taken down. El Mencho's downfall could be the beginning of a paradigm shift in how cartels operate. You can bet that the cartel world is watching. El Mencho was a master at staying hidden, using brutal tactics to crush anyone who stood in his way. But now that his organization has been dealt such a heavy blow, we're likely to see more volatility. Smaller factions will rise up, others will scatter, and the remaining cartel bosses will start tightening their operations. One thing's for sure, the US and Mexico may have struck a critical blow to one of the largest cartels in the world, but the war is far from over. The cartels adapt quickly, and with every leader taken down, another one is bound to rise. And speaking of reaction, let's not forget how the public's view of this case has been anything but simple. In Mexico, there's a sense of mixed emotions. While many are relieved that El Mencho is finally being taken down, others are still questioning whether it's too little, too late. The drug violence, particularly from cartels like CJNG, has ravaged communities for years. How can one arrest or death really make that much of a difference when the roots of these problems run so deep? Meanwhile, across the US, the public reaction has been one of relief. El Mencho's reach across American soil and his control over the flow of illicit drugs has been a major concern for law enforcement. But while many celebrate the success of US agencies, there's also a growing awareness that drug violence isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and this is just one cartel. If you've been following the US-Mexico relationship, you know it's always been a bit complicated. On the one hand, the two countries have an essential alliance in the war against cartels. But on the other hand, there's always the underlying tension when it comes to sovereignty. Mexico doesn't want to look like it's being puppeteered by the US. But here's the thing. With El Mencho's capture, the US now holds a powerful card. Think about it. The US has made it clear that its role in the fight against drugs isn't just about sharing intelligence anymore. It's also about showing up and taking action. The FBI and DEA have been involved in cartel takedowns for a long time, but this is the first time we've really seen such a direct impact on Mexican turf. What does this say about the future? Will we see more US intervention? Will Mexico's sovereignty be put on the back burner for the sake of fighting cartels? The Mexican government has a tricky road ahead. Sure, they got El Mencho, but at what cost? There will likely be backlash within Mexico's political landscape. It's ironic, isn't it? The US and Mexico both want the same thing, to stop the cartels. But how much control should each side have? And where do you draw the line between cooperation and interference? Now let's talk about the drug war strategy. El Mencho's cartel, CJNG, has been a massive force in the world of narcotics. Their operations stretch across the US, from the heart of Los Angeles to the backstreets of Chicago and beyond. His arrest is a huge blow to the cartel, no doubt about it. But here's where it gets interesting. What's next? What happens when one of the most influential cartel leaders is out of the picture? The US government is celebrating, sure. They've captured a man responsible for countless deaths, drug overdoses, and violence. But is this really a win for the drug war? The reality is, one kingpin's fall doesn't stop the cartel business. In fact, it could make things worse. We've seen it before. When a major cartel leader is captured, smaller factions fight for control. This creates a vacuum of power. The moment El Mencho's taken down, CJNG will splinter into even smaller and more dangerous groups. These smaller factions often end up being more difficult to track, harder to infiltrate. So does the capture really change much? Sure, it sends a strong message to the cartels, but the fight against drugs has always been more like whack-a-mole than an actual solution. The business thrives on demand, not just leadership, and the demand for drugs in the US continues to rise. So, the question remains, will this moment really change the war on drugs in the long run, or will it simply be another chapter in the cycle? So, let's get to the real impact. With El Mencho's fall, what happens in the cartel world? Well, we're already starting to see signs of this. Cartel factions don't just collapse overnight. They fracture, and usually new blood rises to the top. We've seen this with previous leaders. When a big figurehead is taken down, others scramble to fill the void. The sad truth is, it's only a matter of time before someone else steps into El Mencho's shoes, and maybe even takes the cartel in a new direction. One of the scariest things about cartels is that their networking power doesn't die with one person. If anything, it strengthens. Smaller rogue leaders and local factions will likely rally together, pooling their resources, becoming more desperate to maintain power. In fact, this could spark even deadlier turf wars between other cartels who want to control the lucrative markets El Mencho once dominated. We're talking about more bloodshed, more violence, and more instability. The US might feel it too. After all, the drugs still flow into American streets, and that's where it gets complicated for both nations. So, let's take a step back and reflect. El Mencho's capture might feel like a huge win, but it's a temporary victory in a much larger, more complicated war. The drug cartels, as terrifying as they are, won't simply disappear. The global drug trade continues, with new players emerging, old tactics being used, and the tragic cycle of addiction and violence carrying on. The big question now is, what happens next? First things first, what happens to the Jalisco New Generation cartel now? You'd think that losing their leader would deal a serious blow to their operations, right? In some ways, yes. El Mencho was the symbol of CJNG, the mastermind behind its explosive rise to power. But don't be fooled. The cartel wasn't just a one-man show. El Mencho may have led, but the cartel's power structure was deeply ingrained in the global drug trade. CJNG's operations stretched across the globe, and new players are already positioning themselves to step into his shoes. You see, cartels are adaptive. They evolve, shift, and restructure after the fall of their leaders. CJNG will likely break into smaller factions, each fighting for control of lucrative territories. We're talking about an intensified cartel war within the Mexican criminal landscape, with rival factions scrambling to secure power. Now let's take this global. The truth is, the impact of El Mencho's fall isn't just a US-Mexico problem. It's a worldwide issue. CJNG wasn't just running operations in the Americas. They were heavily involved in the global drug trade, exporting methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl to Europe, Asia, and even Africa. The reach of these cartels has been increasingly international. With El Mencho gone, international law enforcement agencies are going to have to tighten their grip on global drug flows. It's not just about dismantling one cartel, it's about dealing with a network of operations that stretches across multiple continents. The global drug trade is a billion-dollar industry, and one leader's fall won't stop the money from flowing. Let's talk about US involvement on a larger scale. Over the years, the US has pushed for greater control over global law enforcement efforts, particularly in the war on drugs. The involvement of US intelligence agencies like the DEA and FBI has been crucial in the takedown of cartel leaders, but El Mencho's capture raises some significant questions. On one hand, the US has helped to disrupt global drug networks, making the world a safer place. On the other, there are those who argue that the US is overstepping, interfering in foreign sovereignty and causing more harm than good. The push for greater US intervention in countries like Mexico has led to friction. The question becomes, how much power should the US have in policing the world's drug trade? The fallout from El Mencho's capture could signal a shift in global drug policy. Countries may start to resist American influence, especially as the US continues to position itself as the leader in international law enforcement. This could lead to a restructuring of alliances between nations. Some may welcome US intervention, but others will be hesitant, wary of the implications it has on national sovereignty. As mentioned earlier, CJNG is not a one-man show. The cartel has been embedded in every facet of Mexican society, from politics to law enforcement. The power vacuum left by El Mencho will likely lead to increased violence in the short term as rival factions fight for control. The collapsing of one cartel can strengthen others, making Mexico's drug war even more complicated. Mexico is stuck in a cycle where the capture of one cartel leader never really stops the violence. In fact, it can trigger a new wave of violence and chaos. For the Mexican government, El Mencho's fall is just a temporary victory in a war that seems to have no end. But let's take a moment to look at the public reaction, because it's not all celebration. In the US, the news of El Mencho's capture is being hailed as a major success for law enforcement. There's a sense of justice in seeing a notorious figure like him finally brought to justice. But in Mexico, things aren't as clear-cut. Many in Mexico view El Mencho as a symbol of corruption and violence, but the reality is his cartel is deeply entrenched in communities. His fall might leave a vacuum, but it won't necessarily lead to peace. Instead, it could worsen the human cost of the drug trade as cartel members continue to fight for power. The people, the ones living in the areas most affected by the violence, will continue to suffer. It's a cycle that keeps spinning no matter how many leaders are taken down. Across the globe, people are starting to question the effectiveness of the war on drugs. The US and Mexico are playing their part, but is it enough? It's a question that's been asked for decades. The war is endless, and the stakes keep getting higher. So, what's next for the global drug war? El Mencho's capture represents a significant chapter, but it's just that, a chapter. The war on drugs will continue, and new leaders will rise in his place. The international drug trade will keep evolving, and the global community will have to face these changes head-on. We've seen successes, but we've also seen failures. The question remains, can we ever win the war on drugs? And if so, at what cost? Will the world unite against cartels, or will nation-states continue to fight this battle on their own terms? The answers to these questions will define the future of global law enforcement and the future of the drug trade. So there we have it. The arrest of El Mencho may seem like a big win, but it's also a moment of reckoning for the future of global drug enforcement, US-Mexico relations, and the war on cartels. El Mencho's fall signals the beginning of a new chapter, but whether that chapter will lead to peace or more violence, cooperation, or conflict is still uncertain. What do you think? Is this the beginning of real progress, or are we just seeing a temporary shift in the drug war? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.